is it possible that the root of most of what we would call evil in our society might be linked to attachment wounds in early life? Because I was looking up like dictators like Hitler and Stalin, like these guys were abused severely as children.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I think that if we take out soul level elements, which I believe in, and if we just stick with the earth, our 3D reality, and the biology of a baby, how a little one is treated and cared for, and then what happens later on also makes a big difference. We chatted about Ted Kaczynski a second ago, so this is a perfect time to bring that in. I did another video called The Story of Teddy, and here's a gentleman who is, at least in America, world renowned as a Unabomber, who did some horrific things, hurt a lot, killed a lot of people, ended up in prison in the end. He died, I believe, last year while in prison in solitary confinement, which is an important one because he, again, I'm missing my dates exactly, but I believe he was very young. It was under the age of 5 months. I think it was like 8 weeks or something like that. Had hives, massive rashes all over his body from some kind of reaction to something. And mom brought him to the hospital. This would have been, I think, probably in the 50s. Hospitals weren't that great back then in terms of care and knowing what to do with kids, you know. And he was left there. She left him there for, I believe it was 2 weeks, if my memory serves, strapped to a bed, like a hospital bed, probably just a really terrible table, probably given, and I'm making an assumption here, corticosteroids, something to take the rash down, which probably wasn't a bad thing to do. And obviously he would have been fed and checked on periodically. But we know when someone is in a hospital that doesn't have good care, they get forgotten. Nurses get busy. So imagine this little baby who all it can do is cry, can't get up because it's strapped down. That is massive torture and massive trauma. And it puts the kid into freeze. It's amazing he didn't die, to be honest, in that situation. So for whatever reason, we could say his spirit and soul was strong, because when you hear his interview with Peter Levine, or sorry, his mother's interview, Peter Levine interviewed his mom after all of this. This is where she tells the story. And she said, my little Teddy went into, before this happened, he was a happy, healthy baby boy. And he came out and he was never the same again. His body was limp. And what it was is he was in a collapsed shutdown state. And so the reason that one's important is because mom was not, well, some would argue that she shouldn't have left her baby at the hospital for that long. But in those days, people just didn't know. So we could falter, we could, not me to judge, but the interesting thing is when they did a series, they did a series called Manhunt on Netflix. I can't find it anymore for some reason. They've pulled it. But it portrays, and I think it's fairly accurate, not only the home life, but his siblings, his brother, and they're healthy, connected people. So it was that incident. But the reason why I wanted to bring that in is that doesn't mean you'll become a murderer, to go back to your question of evil. But what occurred to him later in life, he was the recluse. He was shut down. He was brilliant from what I heard. And I read some of his stuff. I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like he could see the problems with the world because he was inflicted with so much pain. He started to think about that. But in this show, they show, him as a little kid blowing up things in the science room, like hurting other people with little explosions. So there's like little hints of his desire to do that. When he got to, I believe it was Harvard, the university in America, for whatever reason, his professors saw he was the loner. He had no friends. So what did they do? They quote unquote recruited him for CIA mind control. And so he was part of the MK Ultra experiments to see what can we do to control people's minds? How far can we push them? And so the way that they started to befriend him is he liked to play chess. So his professor invited him to his office to play chess every day after class or once a week, I don't know. And that was his connection. But, you know, I don't play chess, but it's strategy. You're not really having a conversation. You're like in it, thinking deeply. And then one day, Niall, he shows up to play chess and there's a great bloody chair, an electrical, like a chair. And the guy, and I can't remember the detail, he's like, oh, Theodore, we're doing some, you know, we're playing with some experiments. Would you mind helping us out here? It's a true story. And I don't remember the details. And of course, it was you know, it was based on a true story, but I believe this is what happened. He sat in the chair and he was electrocuted. And they kept pushing him and pushing him. And what was interesting, and forgive me, I don't have the details, like he never said stop. And he said, you can say stop at any time. You can say stop at any time. But my sense is, as someone myself who lived with so much functional freeze, your pain tolerance is very high. And his history of being strapped down at the hospital was just his experience of life. Like, I can sit in this chair for as long as you want me to. So one thing led to another, and then he figured out that they were using him, and then he snapped. And then that's when his evil tendencies popped out. So the irony, I'm sure you see the irony there, you know, government experimentation leads to this citizen of America harming other Americans. It's just absolutely tragic. And then, of course, he was eventually found. They found him. And that's what this series is about, is the manhunt for him. And he ended up in solitary confinement in the end, which is where he started as a baby by himself, strapped to that table. So to go back to, it's a very long way of answering your question, does evil exist? It does, but I think it needs to be born through other things occurring to people that then express that. It's kind of like epigenetics and genetics. Like, you might have the gene for something, but it's not going to express if you're healthy and well and your environment is clean. Where that original evil comes from, that's not my wheelhouse to talk about. That's a whole other story.
If you're interested in seeing the full session and 30 more like it, you might want to check out the Holistic Attachment Summit. This is a revolutionary free online conference which brings together 30 world-leading clinical psychologists, researchers, and practitioners who will share with you their best practices for mind, body, social, and spiritual approaches to healing attachment and developmental trauma, enabling you to be at the forefront of evidence-based care. With a lineup including Bessel van der Kolk, Sue Johnson, Stephen Porges, Janina Fisher, Dan Siegel, Pat Ogden, Paul Gilbert, Stephen Hayes, Richard Schwartz, and many others, this really is a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity. The best bit is it's 100% free to attend live, and you can do so from the comfort of home. You'll also be able to upgrade to your recordings and certification pass after registration, although this is entirely optional. For more information, please check out the sign-up link in the description.